To episode 2. Feel like we should have a jingle.
Yeah, let's not try and sing one on the spot. Maybe
So
we'll.
before this recording started, we were just talking about, we don't even know how many people, I think you know how many people viewed the last episode, right? Not that we
Yeah,
should
I was
care.
I was refreshing. Like as soon as it went live, I was just refreshing every hour, check because I wanted to
Constantly.
see like the thousands and thousands ring up. I think I checked yesterday and I think it was something like 34 or 43.
That's great though. Have they been watching for a while though? Has that been like, is that,
Yeah, so I looked at the analytics and the viewer or listener base or the length of time they're enjoying our content for is longer than average on YouTube, at least.
longer than average, everyone?
Average, so that's good. I reckon it's because people are just waiting for us to say something stupid, or they've accidentally let it run longer than they wanted to. But
That's
no, it's a good
interesting.
spot, I think. I mean, we're not expecting like overnight success, and we were talking earlier, weren't we, that your first 10, 20 episodes aren't going to exactly do the rounds or catch a lot of attention straight away. So but I enjoyed doing these anyway, and it trains the brain.
Me too. Yeah, I think just in terms of trying out this format and seeing whether it works. I mean, obviously, we don't have to re-explain what the format is, but we're gonna very briefly to speak about it without spending 15 minutes on it. We're going to do the whole exquisite corpse type conversation where we have the AI randomly juxtapose a couple of different sort of topics, and we're just going to talk about those topics. And I think we'll have a veto because I think it's really difficult to talk about some of those sort of areas. So I'll bring up the Claude artifact, and we'll try and keep the format like to 15 sort of 20 minutes max as well, just to kind of make it more watchable for everyone. Right. So here's our Claude artifact, and we are gonna click juxtaposition. There we go. Okay. Any of those catch your eye?
Not really, not for me. I would
Okay.
veto this one. That's
Let's
my veto.
let's veto. Let's veto it.
Mm.
Vehicle to vehicle communication meets 3D instrument cluster. I think we had like 3D instrument cluster last time, so might have to
Yes.
refresh these topics. But that's quite interesting. I like the topic of vehicle to vehicle communication in general. Why would you do that? What's the point of kind of having vehicles talking to each other? There's all that stuff about cars sort of synchronizing in motion. So what's it
Yeah.
called? It's not flocking. It's
Platoon.
fleets, platooning. Oh yeah, there you go. There's the fancy word right there, platooning.
So I
Um,
think I always like to do this. I realized on the last episode and on the pilot that we didn't air, but a distinguish a dis, I need to distinguish between like the interpretation of this technology. V to V communication can be what we have at the moment, which is just basically LiDAR following like the leader or following other cars. It's almost as if all it's really doing is knowing the other car's location, and that's kind of one-way communication.
yeah,
When I think of vehicle to vehicle communication, I'm thinking of two-way. So there has to be some kind of benefit beyond location where they're exchanging information, because otherwise it's one way. So what would be an interesting example of that? And then how does that then apply to the 3D instrument cluster?
I have to say sometimes my brain just goes straight to quite frivolous things when it comes to stuff like this. Nothing really serious. Like, I suppose in our daily jobs, we've got this remit to figure out interesting interactions that actually have a purpose.
Yeah.
But I feel like the experience of recognition is a big one. Like, hey, I
Mm.
recognize that guy. He's also Iranian, kind of thing.
Yeah.
What if it's a brand of car? And I'm sure there was something there's a little distant glimmer of a conversation around how certain sort of vehicles can identify other vehicles of the same sort of type. For example, if like two MG cars come close to each other or whatever, two minis, they do some little nod or a flash. That's a cool idea. I for whatever reason I feel like showcasing intelligence in that kind of manner, showcasing capability in that kind of manner is kind of fun, and then it eases people into the idea that they could be doing more with it as well.
I mean, I must admit, I have worked on projects quite recently in the last year or two from new emerging OEMs where there's some kind of mutual benefit between two or more cars of the same brand, exactly as you mentioned. Um, one of them is in a very utilitarian way, like platooning, exactly as you said.
Sure.
The reason I say it's utilitarian is because the only benefit there is that each car is aware of each other's capabilities, when perhaps brand X can't really communicate with brand Y in the same way. But again, that still really only applies on one-way communication. And then another idea I was thinking of is sort of frivolous experience, like almost semi-autonomous level ideas now, where say we're all driving to the same football match,
Right.
and there's some kind of pre-game road trip or
Right.
drive engagement of the fans on the way to the pitch, and there's some kind of in-car experience that connects two or three or four of the cars of the same brand.
Okay.
I'm kind of disappointed by that answer though, because I feel that's very easy. It's very in the ilk of what we're hearing about driverless cars and having them sort of cinemas on wheels or entertainment venues on wheels. And then it would be nice to sort of bring it back to the 3D instrument cluster. And if there's anything we can do that's novel on the V2V side of
Yeah.
things that somehow surfaces in a 3D cluster.
I should really do some of my Google searches over here, because it seems like what you're saying is really interesting. You said two things that I kind of really picked up on and I thought were really interesting there. The engagement side, I totally agree with you. What is that sort of pre-activity, journey time
Mm.
type sort of frivolity in some ways that could be interesting. I remember when I was growing up in the sort of 80s in Iran, when I was a young lad, very, very young. Um, I remember like weddings, and this must still happen in Iran, where they
Mm.
do up all the cars, and they'd all be like really decorated and whatnot with flowers, festooned with flowers. That's probably the right phrase, and they'd
I like
they they'd
going.
platoon together,
Yeah.
but they'd all honk their horns at the same time, which is obviously just it doesn't really fit into our kind of Western sort of driving sensibilities, but it was just such a thing, like I can't even do
What
the little melody that they do, but it was a thing, right? So I'm sure
I
there's YouTube videos. I just won't go there.
I can imagine if you've got the bride and groom in this one car,
Right.
and the rest of the wedding party surrounds them, almost like surround sound.
Yeah.
The different cars, whether it's front, side, back, and in between, they're playing different beats and different horns of this wedding melody,
Sure.
and it's all emanating from around the couple of the day.
Man, your imagination is just taking it to new heights. No, this is just some random drivers going on their
Yeah.
horns. But in the age of kind of more polyphonic sounds coming out of cars, and their audio systems being used
Lights
for
too.
other things as well. Yeah, I suppose
Yeah.
there are these like little cultural sort of quirks and things that are almost like a disco mode on wheels.
Well, we did say last time that you and I quickly default to like the utopian, happy version of everything.
I know,
If
right?
when I mention a wedding platoon, and we should probably mention the funeral procession.
There we go. Go for it. I mean, I've been to a fair few funerals recently,
Well,
so yeah.
yes, yeah, me
Mm,
too. Fortunately, or not fortunately, not so much in the the black limos.
yeah.
I wonder if there's like interesting things
It,
that can be done with them.
Vital did work for a company that makes hearses at one point in its
Really,
history. I wasn't here for that, but I actually find that really interesting. To be honest, as much as I love the sexy cars, and I love the kind of forms and whatnot, I kind of find a great interest in doing the kind of non-sexy cars as well, the utility sort of vehicles. And I think I don't know why this is, but I feel like there's a lot of interesting unsolved sort of challenges. Plenty of people solving challenges for things that look amazing, and but for areas that, I don't know, a tractor or a commercial truck or whatever, they almost don't get the same level of love and attention,
No, and
especially on engagement and user experience factors.
it's easy. I think it's easier in situations like this and with other people in our industry, and I'm including myself here. It is easier to come up with the sort of the sexier, maybe the um, brand interpretation of an in-car experience
Right.
that has a more kind of fanfare. But I am more rewarded by solving some of the difficult things, like I've done in the past, like how do blind people hail driverless taxis is one
Sure.
for Volkswagen and a few others. I did have a bit more of a utilitarian idea for this that I hope actually combines V2V and 3D cluster.
Let's do
Is
it.
well, the great thing that we have with, say, LiDAR and some of these semi-autonomous vehicles, think what Google Waymo or what Tesla can show the driver and passenger in terms of its situational awareness. But what if you could get the situational awareness of the Tesla 2 cars, 3 cars, 10 cars ahead of you, all combined into a 3-dimensional navigation?
Oh, I
So,
see.
so what you can do is you're not just avoiding collisions, but you're also seeing that, oh, thanks to this 3D view, because I've got like bullet time matrix style cameras in 10 Teslas ahead of me and their curvature around the road, I can see traffic ahead or poor, road accident or something more fun like an opportunity to stop by a natural beauty spot. So introducing multiple cameras over a larger distance than you can have in a single car, display that back in the 3D cluster.
That's really interesting. I feel like sometimes when we pull on that level of intelligence, there's a crowdsource element to it.
Yeah, it
Um,
reminds me of like the motorcycle community. They don't, as far as I'm aware, they don't have this coded in, baked in technology, but they'll give each other codes if there's a police officer around the corner
I see. Well,
and
that's
things like
like
that.
when people do that flash when they see
Yeah,
they go like this,
yeah.
there's a speed camera there, or there's a
We,
mobile speed camera.
we could use something like that to do it digitally. We could say to the 9 Teslas behind me, because we're all Tesla buddies,
Yeah.
that there's police. I'm observing a police camera, and you can sort of shoot that backwards to the
See,
cars behind you.
the way I see it, Tim, and this is like taking the utopian hat off a little bit. When sort of these autonomous systems and AIs and whatever are sort of provided by corporate, they're sort of beholden to the values and the rules set out by that particular company. And
Yeah,
it's only when we start to imagine how we can take some level of autonomy away from that, and we start to kind of own our own kind of senses almost, that the really interesting applications start to open up, because
mm,
there's no, it would be a different journey for an OEM to say embed that kind of functionality in there when they already operate in an interesting regulatory sort of landscape.
yeah, yeah.
um,
I mean, I think that's a good caveat as well with almost all of our episodes going forward. Is these are ideas that haven't been vetted against regulation. But I think Elon Musk got mentioned a lot. I think this is the first time we mentioned Elon Musk, but he said something recently that I actually thought was a healthy thing for him to put out there. And he said something along the lines of um, Teslas cannot go on the road until they've passed an immense level of regulation. He said if you printed out all the regulation
mhm.
on A4 sheets, it would fill a room. He says, and he follows everything to the letter except for bits of regulation that he doesn't think is serving the greater good. And he believes the regulation is all about keeping people safe. And if he comes across a piece of regulation that he doesn't actually think necessarily keeps people safe, he will challenge it. And I think that's a very good stance to have. Even when we're concepting like this, we would want to make sure that our ideas are safe and do comply with regulation. However, there might be an opportunity where innovation does better than what the regulation states, and therefore it can be challenged.
Yeah, I think there's mutations, and then there's like healthy sort of variants on things that may or may not sort of agree with already established practices. I think in that sense, you're absolutely right. I think without challenging some of those sort of norms as well, as interaction designers, without challenging the norms, there would
Mm.
simply be no progress. There isn't any, we just sort of repeat the same old stuff. But I think some of it really, for us working at the granular level, sometimes not really visioneering, um, it kind of relies on noticing the subtle nuances. And I feel like focusing on those sort of tiny experiential elements actually sparks lots of really interesting ideas. It's like, hey, what's the most subtle way of doing this that doesn't really rock any boats, that doesn't really need to pass by? I think if you think about a lot of the interaction paradigms that we have, particularly the more playful ones, I don't
Mm.
think an engineer and a designer got together and said, how can we make this more playful? They might be, but I think it might have stemmed from somebody experimenting with something and saying, hey, this would be really useful in this other context. This would be interesting if I added this pull to refresh thing here.
Well,
And
exactly.
some of those are really well documented, of course, but I'm saying that, I think more exploration is the theme of, some of our conversations, is that more exploration and juxtaposition and remixing is needed in order to be able to kind of mash up some of these interesting ideas together.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that is, or at least an example of how innovation can come in the form of an invisible little twist, a tiny little adjustment that people don't even recognize. And the example I can give is, so I'm not an absolute car historian, but there was once a time where indication left or right was quite deliberate. And then there was a shift to how it was just sort of wrapped into the wheel and turning the wheel. It was kind of like second nature to sort of start turning the wheel and indicate left, and it combined the two together. And it was just like the raising of a finger versus the kind of very deliberate,
Right.
which
Okay.
for me, that was just like, wow, that's completely intuitive, invisible, effortless, even thoughtless to a degree. It's second nature. And I think sometimes when you talk about the granularity that we work on, they can go not only unchampioned but unnoticed. And actually, if you go down the sort of design is invisible sort of mantra, then that's kind of sometimes for me where a really exciting innovation happens, is in those sort of invisible magic moments.
In the subtlety, I guess, yeah, in the sort of refinements, and in those small little, yeah, like you say, almost unobservable details at first, but then they become inseparable as part
Yeah,
of the product definition. I think we're talking a bit abstractly as well. Like, I think we need to give examples as we go on some of these interesting things, because I personally, I think you could catalog a lot of these fascinating little effects and these little features, and that would also serve as inspiration as well. Puts you in the right sort of frame of mind to consider future things like that. But I think we've broken the back of this, really. I think we've mentioned how you could potentially subtly sort of expose, either in an automatic kind of way, or in a kind of a, let's have the human filter this kind of particular bit of information. And the idea of kind of exploring V2V sort of communication as well beyond the practical aspect is an interesting one. Definitely worth considering for people who are working in this area, I guess.
yeah, sure.
Should we do another topic? And then if
Let's try it.
this episode goes on too long, because I've got a bit of time, if episode goes on too long, we'll just split it. So the next part
Do it.
is, we could do that, couldn't we? Yeah, generate
Like
more
when,
content.
it's like when the dog memes, when a dog owner breaks a tree in half and
Right.
gives it and thinks it's two different trees. Well, no, it was one tree.
Love that. Dog related metaphors here. Right, okay. Um I've just
So,
pressed it once. Uh
animal detection.
Animal detection meets entertainment streaming. I don't know about this. This going rogue. The AI is going rogue.
I mean,
Um
I just mentioned dogs.
yeah, that's clever, isn't it? It's listening in.
Yeah.
Drowsiness detection. In-car marketplace. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we could say some fun things about that, but yeah, this is too wacky. Well, I'm going to use my veto, right?
Right.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Boom.
Uh,
Pedestrian.
I should have- I
Okay.
the yellow
Okay.
ones first.
The yellow one is interesting, isn't it? Right?
Pedestrian detection meets active seat ventilation. Oh, wow, that is really on the nose for something I worked on like
Really?
a year
Oh
ago.
my goodness. Okay. Right.
Mm,
So let me I'm a blank slate on this. Okay. So first of all, active seat ventilation. Not all vehicles would have anything like that anyway. So let's assume that you're in a super duper sort of car and it sort of cools you as you're sort of resting back on this thing.
yeah,
Um Pedestrian detection, right? So you're driving through a busy city and a pedestrian sort of turns up in front of the vehicle or near the vehicle. They're about to cross the road. What if you
I want to see
just
where you're going with this.
a gust of wind? You experience a rush.
Yeah.
That is bonkers, but I think
If
in
the
the
amount of flies past, they can just.
yeah, in the sense that you can use haptics and other sort of experiential factors, and it does remind me of a project of yours, really, to um, to be able to give cues, give feedback to a user. I think these are incredibly valid, and I think they're heavily underutilized. Again, coming from a automotive prototyping sort of world and background for the past sort of 3 years, 4 years now, I find I find things to be played really safely from the designers, and partly because they don't want to break convention too much, and partly because um, even at the concept level, you have to have some kind of recognition of the technologies that are going to be used. And I think again, it comes back to this whole idea that a lot of the technologies that we use are fairly disconnected. In our mind, you can
Yeah.
mash up things and combine things and utilize all sorts, but in most people's sort of world, it really, including a lot of designers, it just doesn't, those different sort of facets just don't communicate with each other. It's
Yeah, that I mean that gets me thinking about. I've always I speak about this a lot. I don't think I necessarily invented it, of course, but I always talk about multi-sensory UX design. Um, there's two reasons I think we. There's two reasons why I think we could be doing more with more senses in terms of an experience. One is because it makes them more accessible. So if, say, for example, you create an experience that's truly multi-sensory, if a blind person experiences, they still have a good 80% of the experience. And if a deaf person and so on.
right,
The other thing is, I think it's because it's a kind of an almost to a degree, an untapped consideration for very, very immersive brand experiences. So we have visual language like written down, nailed down to a T. We know what fonts work and what colors we should be using and what
right,
contrast will show. Sound design and sound principles, exactly the same. We know what
nailed,
ear
yeah,
cons are. We know what certain noises mean. We know what da 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 da. Touch, like hardly anything until recent, until like the introduction of haptics, which again, I have to bring up Nintendo again. The Nintendo 64 brought in the first ever haptic controller. And now we have it on our phones. And now the Nintendo Switch has what they call HD haptics, which is, it's not just on or off, but you can feel it pulsing or rolling up and down your hand.
sure,
That's kind of the only form of user interaction or user experience in which the sense of touch or feel is engaged. But now when we have something like active seat ventilation, air flow, new form of touch interaction. And now we have haptics, we have airflow. Is there others where we can start developing a touch design principles akin to what we already well understand with visual and audio and so on, and smell? What about smell?
Worked on a project where it was another one of those gadget show challenges where we were up against a florist. So a company that I used to work for, Creode, we sort of reached out to the gadget show, told them that we're ready to kind of work on weird and interesting things, and they came up with this sort of concept of, here's a florist, why don't you create a bouquet that would sort of compete with this floral arrangement that she's going to come up with. On that particular sort of episode, we did use a device which was it was actually that episode was partly filmed in Birmingham, not too far from where I live now. But it was a small sort of device. I forget the name of it, but it had like 4 or 3 sort of vents at the top, and you had these pods that you could put in it, and it would combine scents. And I know there's consumer grade sort of variants that do this, but none of them are doing that in such a controllable way. But there's no reason why you couldn't have hints of cherry blossom and lime and lemon and patchouli and whatever sort of permeate a kind of a particular interaction. You can combine and add memory to it.
I wrote about a concept a few years ago about how smell and the limbus system. So the limbus system is, I think so again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but my understanding of the limbus system is it's a precursor to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is all about your short-term memory. And the limbus is very close to it, and it's about interpreting smells. And in theory, what it can do is you can trigger memories through smells. And we all know this because, a perfume will remind us of our first girlfriend, or the smell of grass will remind us of that summer. So I was thinking, what if you can combine a smell with a piece of information you're finding it hard to remember? Say if you're taking a driving test and I can't remember what I'm supposed to do when I'm going past horses. Well, let's introduce a smell, just for hay's sake, call it hay. It doesn't have to be hay. You're taking your test and you can't remember what you're supposed to do. So you can kind of trigger the limbic system and the hippocampus with the smell of hay and go, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do that.
These are subtle sort of things that I suppose are really underexplored, and we tend to just see things and listen to things, but I have to say I'm a big sort of, I'm not a scent nerd, but I do this sometimes, even when I'm not leaving the house. Like I'll sort of have a particular sort of scent that puts me in a certain frame of mind, and I think that in itself is a good reason why we could be exploring some of these sort of interesting sort of areas as well, as a signal or as a marker. This is the device, by the way. I'm not shilling these guys, but it worked. I mean, it was really interesting. I know what their business model is, obviously selling you the pods, but it did have like a gust of sort of air that would sort of periodically sort of release, and it had an app that you could use to combine these different. If you think about how you can generate sort of lots of different lighting, I do wonder, how sort of our olfactory sort of senses are sort of primed to kind of pick up on things. I mean, obviously we're not as good as dogs, but we can probably recognize, say, 50 different smells. Is it more than that? I don't know. I've never really explored that area to know.
I mean, I don't know either. I think it's probably related to taste. And I think we have something like, is it 5 or 6 sort of taste profiles? Like umami is the new one, salt, sweet, da, da, da. And I think, okay, 1 trillion. Well, so we can get really high definition with it. That's the learning here.
But the thing is interesting, isn't it? Right? But not all of those will be pleasant. You can't get rid of a smell, right? You just
and they have
close your eyes and shut your ears. You can't get rid of the smell.
It's for me. It's one of the most emotive senses in a way. I mean, okay, if you see a terrible thing or a lovely thing, it can be very emotive. and same with hearing.
That's right.
But for me, there's something about the smell that doesn't just remind you of this memory, but it takes you back there. You're almost subconsciously back in that place. And the real power is when they're the greater than the sum of their parts. Because I think, especially in the car at the moment, it's sight is over there, sound is sort of here,
Mm-hmm.
feeling is here, and it's all very, as you can imagine in the car world, quite siloed. But actually, it's the harmony of them all working together. And I think that's where things like virtual reality gaming and metaverse experiences are going, is where you need to take down some of these silos, walls between senses, and make sure they marry together as if they do in the real world. And then your brain will start believing the faux reality as if it were real.
That almost sounds like a manifesto, and I think, Tim, that's a really nice sort of place to sort of end it on. It's almost like a provocation
Yeah.
to consider all these different sort of tools that we have at our disposal. As designers, we want to be able to shape experience, and I think if you were to cut off the nose, you're blocking out a whole raft of other sort of interesting opportunities there. Trillion
Mm.
smells. A
Wow.
whole bunch of things that you're going to
That's
start researching smells now. Bring it into. I think it's I did love working on that sort of one project because what are they called, a perfumer's cabinet. It's like a what they refer to it as, like a almost like a piano or a
Mm.
organ of some description.
That's interesting.
Um, yeah, the perfumer's organ. There we go.
As if it's not a single note you're hearing, but it's the harmony of the melody of them all
I
combined.
think so. Yeah, 3,000 notes exist, and most perfumers know 2 to 300 by heart. Mainly work with these to compose olfactive symphonies. And I, and
Mm.
I, I do love this idea, really, that no matter what you're doing when you're dealing with human experience, it's never that one thing. It's never that one trigger. You might think that you're designing that one thing, but in actual fact, you're designing all the things around it and the effect around it, and they can have unintended sort of consequences as well. Bringing in one signal in, when amplifying one signal, when it might be detracting from another. It's worth considering that as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Right. Well, thanks for tuning in again. I hope this one's been an interesting episode, and we'll get a regular cadence of this going. We're talking about putting it in our calendars for like recording once a week at least. But yeah, please give us feedback. It's been really interesting reading some of the comments and getting DMs from you. But it would be awesome to kind of get suggestions as well on what we're doing right and what we should be doing more of or doing less of. Thanks for tuning in. See you later.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye. I'm just trying to figure out where the stop is.